This is the big topic here is, short-term rentals and the Ala Moana Hotel. And we got two folks that brought this one in. So Joanne from Maine and Eric from Honolulu, actually. And Joanne says, what are some best practices or tips for working with third-party services or companies to help maintaining or renting out a property as a short-term rental when it is not occupied by the owners? Would it be reasonable to expect a profit on a short-term rental property that was purchased for part-time owner occupancy? Or is it better to just kind of have a break-even mentality where the rental income covers the mortgage and the expenses when the owner is not there? Follow-on question with that is from Eric. And Eric says, hey, what are your thoughts about buying and living in a unit in the Ala Moana Hotel? What are the hidden costs or inconveniences for first-time buyers, maintenance, etc.? I kind of thought these were sort of a similar topic. Scott, what's your sort of take on yeah, there you go, on your short-term rental ideas, or what's your expertise on that?
Well, a couple of things. First off, Ala Moana Hotel has restrictions that you can't stay more than like 14 days in the unit at a time. So
by definition, it's a short-term rental. You can't live there. If you're local, if you're Eric in Honolulu, you can't live there, Eric.
That's correct. And the other element to that, actually, that one's fallen under the bill of question of how it fits within that that short-term vacation rental bill, because it's actually apartment zoned, A1 zoned, and that the transient bill more or less says you have to be in resort zone to be able to do short-term vacation rentals. So an Ala Moana Hotel is basically designed in its bylaws just by that definition of not being able to live in there. It needs to go into some kind of rental pool. So now you have a conflict.
So back up on it just for a sec, just to expand on it just for a moment. What's a little bit slower? What's the conflict now between the two? The Ala Moana is the agreement.
The zoning is apartment zoning, but the transient bill that the city council passed more or less puts your transient units, the units that you can short-term rent less than 30 days, into resort zoning. And it's not in resort zoning, but yet that building was built solely to put into a hotel rental pool. So now the conflict and the question is like, okay.
So for as far as the city is concerned, that area is zoned to be apartment, but the building agreement is short-term rental. So really, you're gonna break somebody's rule, someone's law or someone's rule. That's the issue. Okay, got it.
So, but as far as practices for short-term vacation rentals, whether can you make a profit? Of course, you pay cash, you can probably be profitable on it, right? So then there's that balance of cash down to break even. If you get a mortgage, I always try to recommend on properties, you go minimum break even. So therefore, if you need to go on autopilot for some reason, it's covering itself and you're not having to fund it on the side. If you get injured, you lose a job or whatever, it's covering itself. But in COVID, we actually see that model just got blown up. But so, it comes specifically down. That's where we sit down with the client and we do analysis. What's your goal? Where are you trying to get to? How do we do this? How much money do you have to put down? The second part of that is if you put it into a big company pool, like a Ala Moana Hotel, those guys are running everything for you. It's out of sight, out of mind, but they're usually taking about a 50% cut of what you have coming in on that revenue. You can also find smaller ones with more individual property managers where they're taking 20 to 30% of the cut. So therefore the profitability, it tends to be a little easier, because even if you're able to improve that property and increase the revenue on the bigger ones, they're taking 50% of that improvement you just did. And hidden cost, I don't really see hidden cost other than the fact that you got to get in there and look at the net operating income, the income coming in versus what's going out. And most of that is going to be going out to that property manager who's handling it.
Thanks. So Dylan, what's sort of different, or what kind of experiences? The Big Island's got a lot of. I would think it's got a lot more of a short-term rental, at least flexibility, than Oahu has. I'm not sure about that though. What's the difference from what Scott just said that applies to the Big Island?
So we just passed back in what went into effect in October of last year, a short-term rental regulation, which there really was none prior to that. So it's gonna change and really drastically reduce the number of short-term rentals that are available and where you can short-term rent. So definitely, first most important piece of advice is contact the short-term rental laws and regulations are different on every island. So you have to contact somebody on each island that knows that is an expert in that area, because I am not familiar with the Oahu short-term rental laws. I know the Big Island ones inside and out, but vice versa, you probably shouldn't ask Scott about the Big Island short-term rental laws. So you definitely want to contact somebody in that local market to figure out what makes sense and what your restrictions are, because they do vary somewhat significantly. In general, because of the regulation, I have been telling people, if you buy a condominium that has the correct zoning that allows for short-term rentals in their CC&Rs and bylaws, it's a pretty good investment right now, as long as they open up travel and people can come here. But because of this rental regulation, it's going to reduce the number of available rentals, and you can't just buy a home and short-term rent it going forward. That's now prohibited, unless you could get grandfathered in if you're already doing it. So it's gonna, the ability for the supply to just arbitrarily expand is not there. What's here is here. What's zoned legally is zoned legally, and then you still do have to get a permit from the county, but the availability is just gonna go down.